fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of Vertical Stars Podcast 4th season. My loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. Enjoy this amazing interview because David Mack is back to talk the Star Trek Con podcast series on YouTube. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Mack. Thank you for coming back to the Vertical Stars Podcast again.
Yep, I never learn.
Well, this time we're going to talk about Star Trek Con, which is a very cool podcast that you are connected with as the co-writer. So can you kind of tell me what was the impetus behind the series?
Well, as I understand it, it began with an idea from director Nicholas Meyer, who at the time was working with the writing staff of Star Trek Discovery. He wanted to tell a story about Khan's time in exile and sort of explain what bridged the gap from the man we saw in Space Seed to the man we saw in Wrath of Khan. Not just the loss of Marla, but what drove him, what changed him into this man who was obsessed with vengeance. And so Nick had sort of a grand idea for a story. And originally he wanted to do it for TV and then maybe a TV movie. But for whatever reason, it just didn't seem to coalesce in that medium. So he shifted gears and eventually working with the team at Secret Hideout, which makes the new Star Trek TV shows, it was decided to approach it from a new angle, to let this be the premier property that would help them launch a new line of audio drama, full cast, full production audio drama. And it was thought that this would be a good property to spearhead that initiative. So they tackled it from that direction. Nick did a pass on a first sort of attempt at it, and it felt like there was a lot of work they wanted to have done. So they teamed up with a writer named Mac Rogers, who worked with a company called Realm, which ended up producing the miniseries. And Mac Rogers did a pass working with Nick. But there were still a lot of unaddressed notes, and this created a lot more notes from CBS, from Secret Hideout. And part of the issue is that they just weren't, it just didn't feel like it was lining up as well with the new Trek as it was with some of the older Trek. So finally, it was decided to bring aboard Kirsten Meyer as both a writer and as a new executive producer to try and find a way to make this work, to preserve everything that was sort of really cool about Nick's vision, but also make it work and track with the new incarnations of Star Trek and make it work for a modern audience, which has different expectations of Trek. So she was very overworked at that point and continues to be, as she has worked on every live action Star Trek TV series produced by Secret Hideout, plus all the short films. She's had her hand in everything, including co-creating Star Trek Picard. And she was a co-EP on Strange New Worlds. Now she's a co-EP on Starfleet Academy. The woman is very, very busy. So she didn't really have the time to do all the draft work on a new 9-episode audio drama miniseries. So she got Alex's permission to bring me aboard, and she and I basically took all of the existing material, all the existing notes, and we talked about it, we reviewed it, we decided directions we wanted to go, and we rebroke the story. We took all the elements that we thought were most successful, and then we built upon that. And then her job was to take these new ideas into Secret Hideout, sell them to Alex Kurtzman, and at the same time, keep Nicholas Meyer informed of what we were doing and get his feedback and get his buy-in, because he remained an important part of the team through the development process. He was a stakeholder all the way through. So it was important that, whatever we did, we had to have Nick's buy-in as well. As like we weren't just running roughshod over whatever he had done. We had to make certain that we were collaborating and not just overwriting. And so eventually we worked out the story outlines for all 9 episodes. We had a map for the whole miniseries, beginning, middle, and end. And then my job was to go in and I wrote all the first drafts. That was my job, write a first draft of every episode. Kirsten would then suggest changes. We'd, fix them up a little bit. And then she would take what we agreed was our finished first draft. She would do a pass on it. And then those passes were the ones that went into the meat grinder of the story development process that happens at TV production companies and big entertainment studios like CBS, where you now have half a dozen people all giving notes, some of them conflicting with one another. And it was her job to make sense of all of that. And that's what she did, which was a truly Herculean effort, something I couldn't have done. And then she got the scripts through that process until everybody who had to sign off on them did. Then there was basically these were what we called the final writers drafts or final drafts, but they weren't really final because changes happened during production. But at that point, I sort of took a last look through the scripts. I offered some final notes for Kirsten's consideration. Some she took, some she didn't. And taking that information, they went into production. And what happened then was that sometimes in production, you're working with the director, you're working with the actors. An actor just feels like a line. They just can't get their head around it. Somehow it looked great on the page, but the person who has to say it can't really say it. And when you sit down and you find out why, you go, oh, well, let's fix that. Or you catch a little problem, or you decide that there's a story tweak you need to make late in the process. But to tweak this one piece, you have to tweak these 9 other pieces. And so that was what Kirsten did during production, was make sure that if the director wanted to cut a line, that it wasn't a load-bearing line, or if something was cut that was important, that necessary changes were made elsewhere to accommodate that. So that was, again, yet another monstrous task that she took on that I could not have done.
And it's kind of interesting because it does kind of remind me of the old radio shows of old, right? Like
Yeah,
you would
that's
tune
definitely the
into,
inspiration.
and it's interesting because on the and it kind of, at least in my mind, has some sort of there's some drawbacks, some benefits. Obviously, the drawback is you miss the visuals, but as a benefit is the words really do matter. Every word
Mhm.
matters because that's really what you're keying in on. So
Yes.
how are you utilizing the medium to its very best for this podcast, radio show?
Well, I mean, one of the interesting challenges, as you said, is telling a story, but not being able to use visuals to do so. Uh, Even as a novelist, you can invoke visuals in scene description.
Hmm.
As a screenwriter, you become accustomed to simply writing visual scenes. In fact, you're encouraged to. You're encouraged to tell stories in images, and then make sure sometimes you have images that counterpoint dialogue. Here, dialogue, sound effects, and music are all you have,
Hmm.
and you have to rely upon them. And because you have no visuals, you cannot trust that a simple transition from one scene to another, while it's obvious to you on the page, how do you make it obvious to the listener?
Hmm.
And sometimes it leads to what's called narrating the obvious. Characters are describing the scene, but this is a tradition that goes back to the days of Shakespeare, goes back to the days of Plato and Socrates. This is a staple of storytelling on the stage, where you don't have the ability to build a huge expansive world, so the actor invokes it through dialogue and the audience's imagination fills it in.
Hmm.
This is not something that was newly invented for radio. This has a tradition that goes back thousands of years. So we simply relied on that where we could to find a way to work into dialogue an invocation of where and when we are, what is going on, at least at the beginning. Another challenge was to build what we called unique sonic environments and find ways to describe them and differentiate them so that once the audience got used to them, you could then do say a musical stinger or some sort of sound effect as transition. And then when you enter the new environment, you recognize the ambient sound. Like, the med lab has a sound. There is a sound to being out in the jungle. There is a sound to being in the middle of the camp. If
Hmm.
you can get that ambiance unique enough, then you've really got something to work with. Another way that we dealt with that, for instance, was with the aliens who the audience has recently met in episodes 5 and 6, the Alborians. We knew that they were going to be telepathic, and that gave us an opportunity to render Alborian telepathic communication using special sound filters over their dialogue to
Hmm.
indicate that this is being telepathically shared. And we have, one of our other characters, Khan, comment on this initially, saying, I hear your voice in my head. Are you using telepathy? Just to establish it for the audience. And so between things like using different sound effects, using music cues to transition, getting used to new unique sonic environments, and then just utilizing tried and true sound effects like echoes, reverb for dialogue for telepaths. You create a sonic shorthand that the listener can then translate in their mind into a visual.
And I think another thing that, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the way this story is set up is that it's done through recordings that Dr. Lear has located through her time.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually, when you're listening to her perspective, you have a slightly different sound to the voices. There's a slight recorded sound to it versus
Yes.
when you do. I think it's a very interesting little device you use to make sure the readers understand what parts are they recording and what parts are when we actually are there. I thought that was ingenious to do it that way.
That again, that's another classic bit that goes back to radio plays, but it's also been used in cinema. You see it used in movies like The Conversation, which was, I believe, an early Gene Hackman film,
Hmm.
where you've got recorded bits and you see the character listening to the recording and focusing on it, and then you use that as a form of dramatic license to transition into the scene, so that even though they were listening to someone recounting the scene or talking about it, that gives you the dramatic license for the purpose of telling the story
Hmm.
to go back and experience the dramatization rather than just the narration.
And I think the story is fascinating, and the exploration of Khan as a person is fascinating because, like I said, on the one hand, you have it from the I believe the name of this the Seed, right? The first episode from
Base seed.
Base Seed, and then you have him obviously from Wrath of Khan, and you're kind of covering it in the beginning, and you're also backtracking to when he was basically the tyrant Khan from back on Earth as well, and it's kind of an interesting view because you are developing him in a way that's sympathetic, but the same way you still have him being the Khan that we know. So kind of how do you walk that line between kind of give him make him somewhat sympathetic and understandable, but at the same time not losing why he is that villain.
Well, we weren't so much going for sympathetic. We're not trying to rehabilitate Khan. We're not trying to turn a villain into a hero. That was never the objective. The objective was to understand him, to see what drives him and see what broke him. And the way that we approach this would be much the same way that you would think about approaching a character like Macbeth.
Hmm.
Macbeth was not a hero. He was a man of limited ambition. He didn't start out as a villain, but he succumbed to temptation. He succumbed to people telling him that he had a destiny, that there were certain things that were preordained by fate. Were they preordained by fate, or did he turn these events into self-fulfilling prophecies? Did they predict what was going to happen, or did he simply live up to what they told him? Did he simply use their predictions as an excuse to indulge his own ambition? Basically, so we took the same sort of premise, as you would take with Macbeth. What is the hamartic flaw, if you will, in the character that takes them down this road of self-destruction? Even though they don't think of it as self-destruction, even though they're going to blame external forces, in the end, the character is going to do this to themselves. And it's because there is a tragic flaw in the character somewhere. And in Khan's case, it's pride, it's an overestimation of his own abilities, it's an overestimation of his own intelligence. He thinks his is the superior intellect in every situation, even when it demonstrably is not. He is a flawed guy who, and this was one of the episode titles, speaks to this. His biggest flaw is a lack of imagination.
Mm.
He can't see through his own self-created image to see his own lies. He can't process his own shortcomings, and because he can't perceive them, because he won't let himself perceive them, he can't grow beyond them. He can't overcome them. He can't compensate for them because he refuses to acknowledge them. And this is part of what leads to his downfall.
I think it was episode 5 where once again when you introduce the aliens, and which is an opportunity for Khan potentially to
Mm-hmm.
save his people. He has that opportunity. It's there without giving too many spoilers away. There's a
Mm-hmm.
potential that this could be very positive and overt with what's going to happen later in before Wrath of Khan. But he states, and I'm just trying to get the exact phrase. He says he fears what he does not understand. How is
Exactly.
that also a part of him that is a failing that eventually actually dooms all his people?
Well, I mean, it's a failing of the human race. I mean, we
Hmm.
fear what we do not understand. Most fear comes from lack of understanding. Most hatred is born of fear.
Hmm.
We fear what we don't understand, and we hate what we fear if we think it is something that poses a threat to us. Um, Hatred, fear, these, as if you were in the Star Wars universe, these all spring from the same dark side
Hmm.
of psychology. And the problem is that in a primitive setting where fear of the unknown might be a survival trait, in that it protects you from wandering into encounters you shouldn't, saves you from thinking, well, that big fuzzy thing might be friendly. No, no, it probably isn't. The problem is that as you move into a more structured society, those primitive impulses continue to be what drive behavior, even when it no longer is in the best interest of society to live by those psychological models. And again, this is the same problem that even when you enhance the human genome, even when you try to enhance it to the peak of physical and mental acuity and ability or whatever, the problem is you haven't changed the essential nature. You
Hmm.
haven't fixed the critical flaw, which is that superior ability is going to breed superior ambition. And if you are, what was done to create these, eugenic supermen, we are told, amplified, certain aspects of their psychology. It takes small flaws and amplifies them, just as it takes, their good points, just as it takes their strengths and amplifies those, so does it also amplify the flaws. So
Hmm.
does it amplify the misfires. So just as they are prone to great ambition and great ability, they're also prone to being psychologically unhinged.
Hmm.
They're prone to ego. They're prone to overestimate themselves. They're going to be more likely to become narcissists, malignant narcissists, because you take these essential traits that are present in everybody, and it all gets amplified, the good and the bad. And again, this is part of what leads to their downfall.
Now, obviously, in his mind, like I said, he is that enhanced, advanced being or superior being, right?
He thinks he
Uh,
is.
he thinks he is, and perhaps even could have been in the viewpoint of the eugenic wars where he existed. From a 23rd century viewpoint, he must not be that because how he handles the aliens seems to suggest that he's not the advanced being of his time period than he thinks that he is. Because the Star Trek world, the Federation that we know of, would have handled that differently. Would have handled it instead of viewing immediately the threat. Would have handled it in a more maybe I don't know mature is the right word, but let's say civilized way. Does that then suggest that he is wrong about how he views, or he's more primitive than he thinks he is in that
I
case?
mean, the basic premise, if you go back to the original series and look at how conflict resolution was built into the model of Starfleet and the show,
Hmm.
one of the things that Kirk excelled at, and one of his principal modes of operation, was turning conflict into an opportunity for cooperation,
Mm.
taking what seems like, a simple monster story with the Horta and realizing that the Horta is actually the victim,
Mm.
changing the perception of the miners, and then building a cooperation where the Horta is able to go where the miners' equipment can do so more efficiently. It opens up new veins, and its children continue to do the same. Once
Mm.
we realize that these are not threats, that these are essentially potential partners, that
Yeah.
they are intelligent, they can be reasoned with if you stop looking at them through primitive eyes. If you see them with better eyes, you can realize the potential for friendship. Just as
Mm.
when in Day of the Dove, they're fighting the energy creature, and it is up to Kirk to persuade Kang and Mara and the rest of the Klingons who are aboard his ship that we have to put aside our animosity. We have to stop being enemies just long enough to get rid of this thing. We have our own reasons to fight. We don't need to fight to amuse this stupid thing. But the only way to get rid of it is we've got to team up, and we're going to have to laugh it off the ship. Again, taking Klingons who you think of as your sworn enemies, and you've got to make them into your partners. They've got to
Mm.
become your allies, even if just for a moment. The fact that it can be done for a moment means it can be done on a bigger scale. And
Mm.
that was what Kirk did. He would find enemies and he'd find reasons to turn them into allies. He would find the thing that seems monstrous and find a way to realize it wasn't what you thought.
Mm.
They take, the energy creature that they misunderstand in Metamorphosis, and they eventually realize that the whole motivation for the creature and what it's doing with Ephraim Cochrane is that it's in love with him. And
Mm.
again, it's about learning to see things that would scare the living bejesus out of primitive humans who
Yeah.
would only see monsters or malignant phenomena, and learning to see them with more advanced eyes and realizing that there are opportunities here for friendship, for partnership, for greater understanding, for expansion of our understanding of what life is, of what intelligence is. And so this is the great leap that humanity has to make once it meets the Vulcans after first contact. And this changes the nature of human culture. A new way of thinking is taught and reinforced. And humanity, although it's still, is plagued by having primitive DNA that runs our brains, we're at least trying. By the
Mm.
23rd century in Star Trek, we're trying to be better than our DNA. We're trying to become more than the sum of our genetic parts. Khan isn't.
Mm.
Khan represents an amplification of all that was best in us, but also all that was worst in us in the 20th century. He takes everything that we would have revered: strength, intelligence, reflexes, stamina, duration, all the physical, the ability to think, process information, and learn quickly. All that's great, except for the fact that you also amplified his ambition, his
Mm.
cruelty, his atavistic nature, his temper, his ego, his superego. That all got amplified too. You amplified all of the bad with all of the good, and
Mm.
that's the problem.
Now, when thinking about like Dr. Lear, who's the historian, who's the one who's fascinated with Khan, she does. I mean, I'm reading again too much into it. Seems to be romanticizing Khan a little bit. She does
And
seem
she
to
also
be
seems to have a grudge against Kirk. She doesn't seem to trust that Kirk acted with noble motives.
right. She does suggest that Spock intentionally gave false information to excuse the ditching of him on Ceti Alpha 5.
Spoken like someone who doesn't know Spock.
Right.
Then
So
again, she doesn't. She doesn't know any of these people. She's young. She's the generation behind them.
yeah.
We figure she's in what, her 30s or something at this point,
Right.
and she's talking about guys who are in their 60s. So she's talking about the generation before her, as people she's never actually met. And you're talking about military operations, which by their nature don't always release all their complete information to the public, even after the fact. A lot of people seem to have misunderstood, the fact that they say some of Kirk's logs were classified. Well, yeah, I mean, he would have had the Ceti Alpha system interdicted because you don't want other people going there and accidentally stumbling onto Khan
Hmm.
and giving him an opportunity to get off the planet. You'd put up buoys and you'd say, yes, stay away from here. This is interdicted by Starfleet. This is a no go. Do not land on the fifth planet, yada, yada, yada. That's standard. And you would also redact certain information. You wouldn't make a public announcement. Hey, by the way, we met these guys from the 20th century and they're a bunch of engineered supermen and we probably should have imprisoned them, but instead we gave them a planet. This is not exactly something you want to put in a press release and distribute to
Right.
the Federation. Not that you necessarily need to hide it, but you're not going to announce it.
Hmm.
And it's the sort of thing where you're like, yeah, let's just tuck that in a file somewhere in a basement at Starfleet Command and not talk about this again.
So is her distrust more straight military distrust, or is it distrust of just of like a prior generation? Like the
I think it's a little of both. I mean, I think that there's always going to be that tendency to think that the generation before us is not as enlightened as us, that we know better.
hmm.
Uh, it's that journey of self-importance that everybody goes through in youth, and it's not until you get to middle age that you realize, oh wow, I was a pompous twit, and then you begin to realize, oh yeah, the generation ahead of me was actually they did actually know more than I thought they did. And you don't realize that until you get there. And of course, at that point, you're dealing with a younger generation that once again thinks you're an idiot or that you are somehow unenlightened and refuses to realize that, oh, yeah, maybe this is a person who just happens to have decades more experience than me.
Oh, as a teacher of middle school kids, I understand that 100%. I realized a while ago, no matter
They
what
think you're a
information,
dinosaur who has no moral compass.
right, and no matter what I say to these kids for advice, it's always they know better, no matter
Always.
what I
Always.
say.
At least they're not college freshmen. That would be worse.
Because now they think they know they're smart enough to
Now they
actually know
know
better.
everything and they've read a paragraph of Nietzsche. So look out, world.
But I think that it's also kind of interesting when you think about Dr. Lear too, because as she said, the distrust from the prior generation. But as I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, she does seem to romanticize those from way back, from history. She does seem
Yeah.
to be fascinated with Khan as a man, as someone who she sees. It seems like not necessarily all, he's not flawless, but
I
someone
mean,
who's
she
definitely
seems to be
intriguing.
echoing the flaw of Marla MacGyver's,
Yeah.
which was this fascination with history. And suddenly you're encountering a person who is literally a figure out of history who
Mm.
should be dead, but now you are tantalizingly close to being able to study their life with firsthand sources,
Yeah.
recordings made in his own voice. So yeah, she's romanticizing him. She is falling into the same trap that MacGyver's did, which is, you've only read about people like this, and then suddenly here you are. It's so tantalizingly close, and you want to empathize with it. You want to understand it. You want to internalize it, but as a result, you wind up over sympathizing with it.
Is she over simplifying what Khan is as a person based on these recordings that she has of him?
I think that she is cherry picking,
Cherry
at
picking?
least in the beginning. She's cherry picking. But I think that as you're going to find in the next couple of episodes, she is going to come to a greater, broader understanding of both Khan and Kirk and Spock and the whole debacle of Space Seed. Um, I think you're going to find that she is, like many people in the 23rd century, she is capable of learning from her mistakes and she is capable of being able to self-reflect uh, and being able to accept, okay, I didn't see this with a broad enough perspective. In the light of new information, more information, I think you will see that she is capable of evolving her beliefs and opinions.
I mean, is she allegorical for how we do look at history in a way?
Yes,
Because like I said,
everybody
while we
sees what they want. History, people write and review history through their own lens.
hmm,
If depending on where you fall politically, if you're a far right leaning person and you're writing, let's say, a biography of someone like, I hate to say it, but Hitler, a
yeah,
far right biographer is much more likely to turn that into some sort of hagiography rather than a biography.
hmm,
Whereas Somebody with a more balanced viewpoint or somebody from the left is much more likely to cast that figure as a villain.
Hmm.
Uh, but again, it all comes down to biases. So yeah, I think that you're going to see that. I mean, one of the things that we played with right from the very beginning is that everybody had their own sort of opinion of who these people were and what they represented. Uh, a lot of it just based in anecdote, personal opinion,
Hmm.
personal experience, um, without necessarily having the big picture view. Um, and essentially, people see what they want to see. People transform historical figures into what they need them to be to suit a story,
Hmm.
to suit their narrative, to fit either a personal narrative that they want to see exemplified, or to fit a historical narrative.
Hmm. What I think is most fascinating about Dr. Laird too is that for those who haven't seen the series, Sulu is there, who has was there in Space Seed. He knows the situation. He has firsthand experience with Khan, and she's arguing with him about what Khan is. It's like but he knows he was in the room, and I find that
Ironically, Sulu does not appear in the episode Space Seed.
I didn't realize
Not
that.
there. He's not. He's not there. Neither is Chekhov.
So I'm gonna just like check off in Wrath of Khan. He's like,
Just
I
like
know you.
Chekhov, the joke always being that the reason Khan remembers Chekhov was that Khan needed to use the head, and Chekhov was in there, and he kept the room closed too long. And Chekhov, I will remember you. But no, but I mean, I think that there is plenty of justification for Sulu just in Wrath of Khan.
Hmm.
I think that in some of the early scripts and some of the novelizations, it was suggested that Sulu had been working as an academy instructor, which is why he's the pilot aboard Enterprise on an academy training cruise.
Hmm.
And so we can infer that some of those cadets who were killed aboard Enterprise during Wrath of Khan were students of his, people he had trained, people
Hmm.
he had come to know, people he had mentored. And so this would be a personal wound for him. Not to mention the fact that he was there when Khan basically tried to blow him up, tried to blow up the Enterprise, tried to set off the Genesis device. He blames him for having to go through the trauma of losing Spock
Hmm.
in Wrath of Khan. Sulu has more than enough reason to hate Khan's guts based on Wrath of Khan alone.
Then is it in Dr. Lear's position arrogance to think she knows better than the guy who's in the room, or is
Mm-hmm.
it he is colored by his experience and cannot see clearly what happened?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, I think that Sulu, although he's got very good reasons for feeling and thinking as he does,
Hmm.
I think that because of the animosity he has toward Khan in particular and toward augments in general, I think that he probably is not the most receptive person to what Lear is doing. He sees Lear as trying to rehabilitate Khan, maybe at the expense of the reputation of Jim Kirk, who at that point in continuity has just been killed. They think that he's been lost in action aboard the Enterprise B, lost to the ribbon, whatever, the Nexus. So as far as they know, Kirk has just died, which is part of the impetus for why this is coming up now. And he's still singing. He's still grieving the death of Jim Kirk. And at that moment, along comes this person who wants to slander
Hmm.
the memory of Jim Kirk, who wants to impugn the motives of Spock, who wants to seemingly rehabilitate the reputation of this madman Khan, who Sulu still blames for trying to kill him and
Hmm.
killing how many people he knew. This is the wrong time to be pushing Sulu's buttons. You
Hmm.
don't want to bring up an issue like this at the time when he's still grieving the relatively fresh wound of losing Jim Kirk.
And going back to the idea of the supposition that Spock intentionally was wrong on what he said about Ceti Alpha, safety of Ceti Alpha 5, which I believe was Ceti Alpha 6 that explodes. Is that
And the
correct?
Alpha 6 exploded, is what
Exploded.
Khan
It,
says explicitly in Wrath of Khan.
yeah.
But the Alpha 6 exploded.
And
However, he gets some of the details a little off. He says, the shock shifted our orbit. No, actually, what it did is that it rained the debris of Ceti Alpha 6 down upon you and laid your world waste. Your orbit didn't actually shift. Although in early drafts, this eventually ended up getting omitted, which is really too bad, but it was so scientific and filled with so much jargon that it was decided that the audience was probably never going to be able to keep up with this.
Hmm.
We actually found evidence for an actual star system that had this kind of weird orbital mechanic about a pair of planets that are locked, at basically Lagrange points from each other that go around the star. And at certain points in the gravitational dance, they swap positions in a little whip around like this. They
Really?
do this. So at various points, whichever one you think is in the outer orbital track, at some point they're going to switch orbital tracks. There's actually evidence that this does happen. This is actually not just something,
Right.
out of a fever dream. It's been shown you can do this. There's like actual orbital models, and then they found a system that actually does it. It's insane, but the universe is full of insane things.
Right.
So it's actually possible that when this calamity occurred, it would have. Our plan was that it was going to occur at the point of the orbital switcheroo, which was going to exert gravitational stresses on the wreckage of Ceti Alpha 6, raining even more of it down upon the planet, exacerbating the destruction, but also trading their orbital tracks so that at that point, what was Ceti Alpha 5 now appears to be in the orbital track for Ceti Alpha 6. And because Ceti Alpha 6 has exploded and been reduced into debris, most of which has crashed onto Ceti Alpha 5, and the rest is now dispersed in a debris field that's ringing the star system. When Enterprise or when Reliant shows up all those years later, 15 to 18 years later, and sees this planet, it's in the orbital track for Ceti Alpha 6.
Hmm.
So there it would have preserved the shifted our orbital path, but that would have happened anyway. But it was this whole complicated thing. We worked it out. I had the references, but it all came down to how the hell are we going to work that into dialogue? How the hell do we explain that? It was just so technical, and eventually I think it just didn't make it into the final scripts. There was no room for it. Eventually we realized it was more important to focus on the character stories,
Hmm.
on the emotional arcs, on what was driving people, what was happening day to day on the ground. And as much as fun as I think it would have been to have actually cooked up and presented, this, you know, fabulous, explanation for why did they think Ceti Alpha 6, Ceti Alpha 5 was Ceti Alpha 6. When you don't have visuals, when you can't actually show people the
Hmm.
animation of how it works, it is very, very hard to explain. But
Hmm.
we had it. We had it.
But
We didn't we didn't want to gloss over it, but without visuals, it's really, really
hmm.
tough to sell that one.
Well, when you made the combo version of this, you can definitely show it.
Oh well, when they animate it, sure, we'll add that in.
Well, I also, I mean, like it also brings again back into question Spock. Spock doesn't usually make mistakes, but at the same time, there's an argument to be made that he didn't have the time to really investigate everything because they were kind of on the move to make this thing happen and stick him
Yes,
someplace. Where did Spock go wrong? Did he just not have the time? Did he just, was it carelessness? Was it he missed an important fact? Where was Spock wrong on this? And will we find out why he was wrong on this?
Spock wasn't wrong.
Okay.
Spock made no mistakes.
Okay.
This is not on Spock. That's
So,
all I'm going to say about that.
okay. All right.
Because there's more coming. You've still got episodes 7, 8, and 9 to go,
Okay.
and I'm not going to tell you more than that.
But we will but there will be an answer to what happened
Oh yeah,
between
yeah.
Kirk and Spock.
You'll find out. You'll find
Okay.
out. This is coming, and and again, it's not just science gobbledygook. It also plays into why the characters are doing the things they do.
Mm. And I think another interesting thing is too, because like I said, Sulu being into the story is a fascinating addition. George Takei is obviously voicing his character as he
Mhm.
should. When you were writing the script, did you already know he had agreed to do the voice, or were you hoping he'd be willing to be involved to do the voice?
I don't know that they had approached him yet. I don't know that it was locked down. We might have had to rewrite, but I think we were pretty sure that we could approach George Takei and Tim Russ. They had shown a willingness to work with the Secret Hideout team before. Um, we had talked briefly about whether we wanted originally to deal with setting it a little bit earlier, using Jim Kirk,
Hmm.
maybe getting seeing if there was some way to get William Shatner involved, but that was eventually ruled out by powers above us.
Hmm.
And the eventual decision was that if we wanted to have legacy characters, that Sulu was our best bet. And because of the era and what had already been established in Voyager, uh, Tim Russ seemed like the other good choice of somebody we could bring in who would have a reason to be there. And that would give us characters who could talk to each other, characters who could share information with one another. And that was pretty much how we tackled that.
And I know, like you said, we're going to explore it a little bit later, but I'm going to poke one last time. Going back to the idea of Spock.
Good
Um,
luck.
Tuvok being a Vulcan, is he there to help offer insight into Spock's character as a Vulcan?
That's not really what he's there for. He's not there to exonerate Spock or implicate Spock. Uh, Tuvok, why is he there? He's there essentially to provide a cool, dispassionate viewpoint that counters the more emotionally driven viewpoint of Dr. Lear. Whereas Dr. Lear is coming at this whole investigation driven in part by emotional factors, let's
Hmm.
say. Tuvok doesn't have any such bias in his approach to the material. He's able to look at all the same evidence she does, but without the emotional baggage that she brings to the equation. As such, he is able to evaluate it much more logically, much more coldly than she does. And this enables him to see certain things that she doesn't.
Hmm. Now, thinking again about Khan, right?
Sure.
And once again, because this is once again an interesting character study on this individual, and I think one question that, at least to me, that comes to my mind is that was once Khan was woken up, was this inevitable that he would come into conflict with those in the Federation? Could he have ever have lived happily within the construct of the Federation?
I don't think so. Khan was not suited to life within the Federation. It,
Hmm.
it was a culture that would have been completely alien to him. Um, its ethos was antithetical to what he believed. I can't see him acquiescing to the needs of Federation society. I can't see him adjusting or adapting to life on a Federation planet. And I don't think that Kirk would have wanted to risk putting Khan down anywhere where a culture already exists, particularly one that has any kind of technological capacity at all, because you wouldn't want to take the chance, as we see very rightly in episodes 5 and 6, that Khan's first impulse is going to be to conquer it, because that's
Hmm.
what he's wired to do. Part of the rationale for putting him on Ceti Alpha 5 is Ceti Alpha 5 is at the time when they put him there in Space Seed, it is a lush planet. It has a very good atmosphere. It's at a decent orbital distance from its star. It has temperate climate. It has fresh water. It has abundant plant and animal life. It has arable soil. They give him everything that he and his people are going to need to set up a colony. They give them seeds, they give them, irrigation equipment, they give them a med bay. They don't just strand them with nothing and say, here, dig your way out from nothing. They give them at least the rudiments, but they know that, even with everything they give him, it's not like in their lifetime they're going to be able to build a ship
Mm.
out of nothing and get off this planet. They don't have it. They don't have the simple thing which is called infrastructure. You might have all the knowledge of what a starship is composed of and how all the systems work, and that's great. But if all you've got are you and the 73 people you're stranded with, and you have no industry, you have no population to call on to build things, you have no way to build factories, you have no way to build automation,
Mm.
you've got no way to mine all the metal you would need. You have no way to mine the fissionable elements you would need to drive the engines. You don't have the manpower to build the facilities you would need to launch something. You simply don't have the manpower. You
Mm.
don't have the time. You don't have the resources. It's going to take generations, hundreds of years to expand that core population, in theory, assuming they can even learn to reproduce, to a point where you're going to have any kind of infrastructure. And by that point, Khan is dead, and his people, in theory, having been left in exile with nobody to conquer but to live amongst themselves,
Mm.
at that point, hopefully the urge to conquer, the need to conquer, has abated because there's nobody to conquer. Suddenly, the notion of conquest leaves the culture because, well, it's just us here.
I think one thing that's kind of interesting. For one, we do know in episode 5 that Khan almost had an out. He almost, if in his mind, he could have gotten. He thinks he could have got a hold of that ship. He could have gotten off the planet.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, it's a little delusional considering the
he
advancement
is delusional.
of the aliens, but there's a thought to it for himself. Um, there's an argument to be made. I'm sure Khan made it. Did Kirk make a mistake by even giving him this much of a chance? Should he have either imprisoned them somewhere? I mean, did his compassion was his compassion a mistake?
No. Now, Kirk made a rational decision here, believe it or not. He very rightly deduced, given the capabilities, the strength, the resiliency, and just the temperament of who these people are, and the way that he knows Federation penal colonies operate in the 23rd century,
Hmm.
there was not a Federation penal colony anywhere that was going to be sufficient to hold these people and definitely not to rehabilitate them. These
Hmm.
people were not rehabilitatable. Left to their own devices among only their own kind, sure, maybe they'll thrive given a world to conquer, given something other than other sentient beings to put themselves into conflict with.
Hmm.
But you put them anywhere, you put them in a penal colony, they're just going to fight their way out. They're eventually going to kill their jailers. They're going to escape. And maybe they won't be able to conquer the planet, but they are going to cause mayhem. They'll cause destruction. Innocent lives will be lost. You can't rehabilitate them. That's a waste of time. So why create the risk?
Hmm.
And if you're going to just put them into maximum security and solitary confinement and all this kind of crap, oh, well, then why did you bring them back at all? You might as
Hmm.
well have just killed them. That's inhumane. It's already, we know already in this century that solitary confinement is inhumane. It should be considered a human rights violation to do that
Hmm.
to people, even for punitive reasons. It should be considered a human rights violation. There's no way that Kirk would have said that that was an acceptable fate for Khan and all of his people, some of whom we, posit in the story are youth. You can't just lock them up. They haven't done anything.
Hmm.
But you can't trust them. You also can't just unleash them. You can't unleash augments into society.
Hmm.
So what are you going to do? You can't put them in solitary. It's inhumane. You can't put them into penal colonies because they're just going to escape and
Hmm.
innocent people will be killed in the process. You can't hold them forever on the ship and you can't summarily execute them. That's murder.
Hmm.
So what do? Your only real option is to give them some place where they can live free without posing a danger to anybody else. And then you put up buoys, space buoys with automated beacons that tell people there are dangerous beings on the fifth planet. Don't attempt any landing there. This system is interdicted by order of Starfleet and the United Federation of Planets. And then go on your merry way. You give them a whole planet that has no, as far as no existing intelligent species on it. Nothing but animals, insects, birds, fish, plants, but no actual intelligent sapient creatures for them to mess with.
Hmm.
You put them on this planet, you say, all right, you think you could have built a paradise if only nobody had been there to oppose your will. If you had been allowed to build the society that you want, build it your way by your strictures with your people, you think you'd have built paradise. Okay, here you go. Here's a planet. Go ahead,
Hmm.
build paradise. Show us what paradise looks like when you build it. Go
Hmm.
ahead, show us. But you're not getting off the planet. We're not going to leave you with a ship. We're not going to leave you with the components to build a ship. And by making sure that you only have the rudiments of survival for creating agriculture, for feeding yourselves, for providing shelter, medicine, basic survival. You've got shelter, you've got water, you've got food. That's pretty much, that's fair. That's a fair start.
Hmm.
Kirk gives him that, knowing that 73 people, no matter how strong, no matter how motivated, no matter how intelligent, they're not going to be physically capable of building the infrastructure that you would need to create a ship that can get you off that planet. And
Hmm.
they're counting on the Bowies they've left to tell people to stay the hell away from here,
Hmm.
assuming people respect a warning to stay the hell away from the planet, which in the 23rd century we have to assume most people probably would. Especially if you tell them there are extremely dangerous people down there who are going to kill you and steal your ship if you try to land there.
Hmm.
You pretty much have created essentially the only tenable situation. You have exiled them, you have partitioned them off so that they can't pose a threat to any of your people or anyone else. You have you mainly given them their freedom. They have a whole planet. They have a
Hmm.
whole planet and they've got their own people. They can make their own laws, self-determined, and you give them everything they need for survival. You've given them shelter, food, water, tools, medicine.
Hmm.
That's fair. Kirk was compassionate, but he was also reasonable, and that was fair. And given the capabilities that he knew these people had, that was really the only good decision he could have made.
Now, I mean, I really I love the study of Khan and what you're doing with the whole with the series. What can our listeners look forward to in the upcoming episodes?
Twists, turns, heartbreak, pathos, revelations, excitement, revenge, and understanding.
Now, is this leading to other ones you're going to be working on for other characters from Star Trek? Like, what is the
We have no
plan going
idea.
forward? No
We
idea.
don't know. We honestly don't know yet. As far as I know from my conversations with Kirsten, there have been no conversations yet about further audio drama projects. I know that she has option in her contract to do more. She wants to do more. I want to do more. I would like to work on some more with Kirsten.
Hmm.
I have ideas that I would like to pitch for Star Trek fullcast audio dramas. However, at the moment, Kirsten is very busy. She has what's called an overall deal with CBS. She's trying to develop ideas for her own shows beyond Star Trek. She is essentially taking this very rare spot of time and she's using it to try and work on new things. And hopefully she'll get the opportunity.
Well, 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 like I said, I
My
think
video is going out of sync, by the way.
yeah. Sorry, we're about to wrap up.